So one of the questions I get a lot is, hey, if I lend my car to somebody, are they covered? The short answer is it depends, which is the worst answer that always comes up with insurance, but it's the most accurate answer. And so I wanted to just kind of unpack that depends a little bit. Boy, that could come off as a bad pun, but the issue that you run into with permissive users is what we call them in the industry, is somebody who's not listed on the policy that you're giving the keys to the car to and they're driving. The policies, different policies have different issues. So there's some companies out there that won't cover a permissive user unless the permissive user is over the age of 25. Other policies, companies that I work with, will cover permissive users as long as the permissive user is fully licensed and is not committing any crimes. Sometimes they're going to have issues. Some companies I've seen will have issues where they'll drop coverage down on permissive users. So like the permissive user's covered, but if you're carrying like $250,000 of liability and you lend your keys to somebody, insurance companies only providing state minimum. In Washington, that's $25,000 per person. So they're lowering the coverage of the permissive user. The other parts that I've seen that will happen is it's a household driver. So like a lot of times people are like, I don't want to list my 16-year-old kid on the policy because my rates go way up. And so they don't add them onto the policy when they get their license. And some companies, there's two main schools of thoughts that I've seen with this. If they are a household driver, they're not falling in the category of permissive user. So a permissive user would be somebody that's your neighbor, it's your friend, it's your aunt or your uncle who's visiting from out of town. That's the permissive user. Like they don't have regular access to your vehicle. They're just driving it on a one-off basis. That's where you can see like either you have full coverage just as if you were driving it, or you're going to have reduced coverage because some companies will reduce coverage to state minimums. But other than that, they're pretty cut and dry. Before I go into the household drivers, unlisted household drivers, did want to mention this part with a permissive user. If you give your keys to somebody to drive and they get in an accident and your insurance company pays for it, when you lend your car, you lend your insurance. The good thing is the accident was covered. The bad thing is that it's going to count against you as an accident. It's going to show on your loss history as an at-fault accident that was paid out. Now, it's not going to show on your MVR. It's not going to show on your motor vehicle record, but it will show that in the insurance reports that your policy had an at-fault accident that was paid out by your insurance company. So it's something to just be aware of. It will affect your rates when you give your keys to your aunt or your uncle and if they get into an accident, it's going to affect your rates still. So it's something to be aware of with that. When you lend your car, you lend your insurance. So that's permissive users. Unlisted drivers is a different issue. So unlisted household drivers is somebody lives with you. It could be a child. It could be a relative that's moved in with you and you don't list them on your insurance. There's a couple of things that I've seen happen in the industry with an unlisted driver. One is some companies totally excluded. If they live in the household and they're not listed on the policy, not going to be covered. That's the worst case scenario, right? Because now there's an accident and the vehicle is not covered, but even more importantly, the liability to the other person is not covered. The other thing that I see happen is they'll change the deductibles on your vehicle for physical damage to your vehicle. So for instance, your child turns 16 and they always have to have a time period that they're giving you, a grace period, 60 days, 90 days, something reasonable. It's not like, hey, they turned 16 yesterday and they can't drive because now it's the weekend and we can't add them on until Monday. There's going to be some grace period with that. But after that 60 days or 90 days, if you don't add them on as a driver, they're going to, like I said, some companies will just totally exclude. Other companies will raise the deductible on your vehicle. So let's say you have a brand new Honda Civic and you got a $500 collision deductible, and the young driver who you didn't add on because it was going to make your rates go up gets into an accident. Worst case scenario, nothing's covered. Best case scenario is they say, hey, we're going to cover the liability to the other person, and we're going to increase the deductible on your vehicle from $500 to maybe $5,000 or higher. Sometimes they won't cover your vehicle at all, and they'll only cover liability to the others. So that's something to be aware of. It is something that you should add those drivers on. If they are living in your household, then you need to make sure they're added on. A unique situation that comes up, and maybe it's not unique, but one of the common questions where there might be exceptions to that rule is where you have like dual custody. So maybe in a divorce situation, the child lives with one parent for part-time, lives with the other parent the other time. You don't have to list them on both policies. If they're listed on one policy, then the other policy should recognize, hey, they are a listed driver. They're not an undisclosed driver. They should be listed on the policy of the house that they live at the most often or the vehicle that they drive the most often. And then we can show like, hey, this isn't like some weird thing. We're just not going to double dip on them. So you would want to just make sure they're listed on one policy, but then disclose that to the agent of your policy too. So I would say, hey, give them a call and say, my 16-year-old's driving. They're listed on my ex-spouse's policy. That's where they live, 51% of the time, and they have a vehicle there. Are they okay to drive? And they should be fine. The reason why I say you should still call your agent, because remember we said some companies have an total exclusion if that driver is under 25 and not listed on the policy. So you'd still want to make sure you talk to your agent in case you might be in one of those policies where they have to list them on anyways. So that's lend your car, lend your insurance is the bottom line. If somebody lives with you and it's going to be over 90 days that they're living with you, and so I'm not talking about someone visiting, make sure you talk to your agent because they should probably be added onto the insurance. And if they're on a different insurance policy, still talk to your agent just to make sure that there's no nuances of your policy that could fall into a gray area or a crack where there's a lack of coverage.